Grace and peace. I'm Brian Musser, the Baptist Campus Minister at Drexel University, and this is Peace and Power Christian Fellowship, the peace of Jesus Christ to change our lives, and the power of the Holy Spirit to change our world. We are continuing, we're actually concluding our series on the first half of Revelation, Revelation Understood, looking at the trumpets. This lesson, we'll be looking at chapters 8 all the way through 11, and this is the second video of this lesson, and in the second video, we'll be specifically engaging with the locusts. And this is the fifth trumpet, and it corresponds with the eighth plague from Exodus. We showed in the previous video how quite a few of the trumpets, the seven trumpets, correspond with one or more of the 10 plagues in the Exodus narrative, and looking at how that sets up the Exodus narrative as an understanding, interpretive narrative for the trumpets as well. We see that the plagues were used by God to free his chosen people from a larger oppressive people in which they were enslaved, and that is kind of what the trumpets are being used for as well. The trumpets are these cataclysmic um, divine actions to free the followers of a God, whether that's the 144,000 or the great multitude, from their enslavement within the current world around them. So, as we look at the fifth trumpet, we're going to be talking about, and this is the first woe, there's three woes. Fifth, sixth, and seventh trumpet are the first woes, or are the three woes, and we'll be talking about about a locust army. Then I looked, and I heard an eagle crying with a loud voice as it flew directly overhead. Woe, woe, woe to those who dwell on the earth at the blast of the other trumpets that the three angels are about to blow. So that's how chapter 8 transitions from the first four trumpets into these last three trumpets, setting up the fifth trumpet. Starting with chapter 9, verse 1, the fifth angel blew his trumpet, and I saw a star fallen from heaven to earth, and he was given the key to the shaft of the bottomless pit. He opened the shaft of the bottomless pit, and from the shaft rose smoke like the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened with the smoke from the shaft. Then from the smoke came locusts on the earth, and they were given power like the power of scorpions of the earth. They were told not to harm the grass of the earth or any green plant or any tree, but only those people who did not have the seal of God on their foreheads. They were allowed to torment them for 5 months, but not kill them. And their torment was like the torment of a scorpion when it stings someone. And in those days, people will seek death and will not find it. They will long to die, but death will flee from them. In appearance, the locusts were like horses prepared for battle. On their heads were what looked like crowns of gold. Their faces were like human faces, their hair like woman's hair, their teeth like lion's teeth. They had breastplates like breastplates of iron, and the noise of their wings was like the noise of many chariots with horses rushing into battle. They have tails and stings like scorpions, and their power to hurt people for 5 months is in their tails. They have as king over them the angel of the bottomless pit. His name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and in Greek it's Apollyon. The first woe has passed. Behold, 2 woes are still to come. Now that is a very dense passage, and there's a lot going on there. We're not going to unpack it. We're not going to unpack what these locusts look like. It's very interesting, and it's kind of hard to figure out if John is talking about locusts and using metaphorical appearances, because these locusts will be strange locusts looking like something else, or is John talking about an army and using locusts as a metaphor for the army? So is the army the metaphor for the locusts, or are the locusts the metaphor for the army? I really don't know. It's a very interesting question, and we see how symbolic the language is in Revelation, that this is kind of somewhat, either one is possible. We've already seen, and this is probably the primary example of a metaphor in Revelation. We see Jesus as both the lion and the lamb. Now we know Jesus is not a lion, and we know Jesus is not a lamb. Jesus is the Son of God, second person of the Trinity. Jesus is Jesus, came as a human being. Neither of those, I, neither of those metaphors, lion and lamb, are to be taken, you know, as Jesus is a lion. No, Jesus is like a lion. So we have this locust army. And what is this locust army like? It's pretty terrible. It can torture people with a sting for 5 months. It looks human in the faces, hair, all this kind of stuff. There's scorpion stuff going on. It is a very, very dense and complex metaphor. Either way, it's working. Is it an army like locusts, or is it locusts like an army? We don't know. There's a lot of people with a lot of opinions on it, but I want to point out, and this is how we're looking at things a lot in the story of Revelation, is how locusts in the Old Testament show up time and time again, and are a significant interpretive piece to this. Again, it is the eighth plague. The locusts, cover the face of the whole land. So the land was darkened, and they ate all the plants in the land and all the fruit of the trees that the hail had left. Not a green thing remained, neither tree nor plant of the field through all the land of Egypt. In Psalm, and talking about the Exodus, he spoke and the locusts came, young locusts without number, which devoured all the vegetation in the land and ate up the fruit of their ground. So we see this eighth plague in Exodus, and also Psalm 105 as it's redescribing the Egyptian Exodus and the history of the Israelites as well. But we also see that Joel does some fascinating things too. The entire book of Joel is pretty much about locusts and a locust plague. And Joel gets confusing as well, whether or not he's using locusts to talk about armies or armies to talk about locusts. It is a very interesting metaphor that John picks up in Revelation as well. Joel 1:4, what the cutting locust left, the swarming locust has eaten. What the swarming locust left, the hopping locust has eaten. What the hopping locust left, the destroying locust has eaten. And it's kind of fun. Locusts were such a big thing in the time of Joel that they had multiple words for locusts. We pretty much just have locusts. They have a word for cutting locusts, a word for swarming locusts, a word for hopping locusts, a word for destroying locusts, and all of that is a fun, well, not fun, difficult, but I enjoy difficult things. A difficult thing to interpret when we only have locusts are not as much of a big deal, and we don't have the language for everything that's going on there in Joel with the locusts. But if we turn to Joel 2:4-5, their appearance is like the appearance of horses, and like war horses they run, and as with the rumbling of chariots, they leap on the tops of the mountains, like the crackling of a flame of fire devouring the stubble, like the powerful army drawn up for battle. Again, we see Joel using this metaphor between the army and the locusts and the army. It is throughout the Old Testament that if you were going to describe locusts, you would use military terminology. And if you were going to describe armies, you could very easily use locust terminology. In the Old Testament mindset, and probably continuing with John, that was an apt metaphor, a well-used metaphor, a very common way to think in 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 the Old Testament thing. So why locusts? Why not spiders or snakes? I hate spiders and snakes way more than I hate locusts. But locusts were a very interesting phenomenon in the ancient world. One, they came like armies, and armies came like a locust. Two, although spiders and snakes are dangerous for individuals, and I don't know a herd of spiders, I've never seen, or I hate thinking of a pit of snakes. But locusts traveled in swarms, and they could be devastating in ways that other animals were not. So the fact that they would march forward, wipe out an area, and then move on was very much like how the armies positioned there. So this is why the locusts are seen as a plague. And the second question I would love to hear from answers for you? Are we talking about real actual locusts, or are we talking about an army? Because that will be very interesting as we turn through to the sixth trumpet. As always, there are two ways to join this conversation: in person Sunday nights at 5 p.m. and the JEMIC weekly wrap-ups on YouTube and or WordPress. I enjoyed having this conversation with you. It can continue on social media: Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, WordPress, YouTube. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow as appropriate on those social media outlets. Enjoyed having this conversation with you. Hopefully it continues real soon.